Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and my honor to present my opinion to such a distinguished audience related to global intercontinental cooperation, global governance and position of small countries. I am coming from a small country and I am sure my view is burdened by that fact. That is why I do not consider it neither definite or universal, but merely as a contribution to the variety of opinions that you can hear around us. In addition, I must say that my position is quite comfortable. I am no longer a governmental official, and therefore I am able to express my own attitude rather than to follow mandatory the official governmental position. Let me start now after this introduction. The characteristics of the current world are quite different than those only several years ago. One trend is becoming more and more evident. The emerging markets are becoming increasingly essential to the health of global economy. At the same time, the developed countries continue to be distracted with domestic concerns. We are witnessing the accelerated repositioning of the world growth engines. The center is moving to the Far East. The long-term strategy of the most important country, United States of America, is not clear enough. For example, what is the answer to the repositioning of the world economic and eventually and inevitably political power? Is there a clear acceptance of the single fact that in the probably near future both political and economic positions would be challenged and that the global sharing of responsibilities would become necessary? These are the questions on which straightforward answers are not offered. Situation in Europe is even more complicated. The European Union, as we know it today, was established by the Maastricht Treaty. The concept was, in fact, the old European ideal, the ideal of European federation. It was seen as a step forward in returning Europe to its prior position as a global power. If individual nations and countries are too small for such position, then the collective body could make it. This fact becomes gradually more and more obvious. None of the individual European countries, including the largest ones, is able to play the world power role. Unfortunately, the vision of unified Europe experienced significant challenges by economic crisis in 2008. The prolonged effects of the crisis later involved on the public debt crisis are present until these days. The economists argued against decentralized fiscal policy under the umbrella of centralized monetary policy. Consequently, some of the countries, especially the less developed ones, were unable to produce economic policy as a sound combination of fiscal and monetary policies. The relatively recent serious discussion among European Union member states on what should be the way forward, either to cut the expenditures and to balance the budget or to spend more in order to increase local demand, is a very good example. This contributes to the argument of necessity to coordinate monetary and fiscal policy. However, I would say that this is only a signal that the current level of integration is not sufficient to secure the long-term and sustainable growth. Look, for example, at the foreign policy. There are a number of cases even related to the very important world events where the foreign policies of individual EU member states were unable to reconcile and produce unified EU policy. I'm not saying that a lot of efforts and actions to resolve the problems are not undertaken. On the contrary, however, the fact that the problem arose unexpectedly and out of the blue showed that the problems are of the systemic nature. The third anchor of the globalized world, by all means, is China. China has experienced extremely high GDP growth rates over the past decade. The large industrial output, however, outstrips China's consumer demand. As a result, China must export. In other words, China depends on the health of global world market. Here we have very obvious interrelations and interconnections. On one hand, China depends on the world economy, and on the other, China's growth is a significant contributor to it. Although the recession after 2008 heavily affected China's export and consequently the growth, this country is the most definitely on the rise. Of course, as in other cases, the things are never straightforward. Firstly, India, the next last GDP growing country, and Japan, already developed and in spite of current difficulties very important country, are creating China's geopolitical disadvantages in the Far East balance of power. Also, some economists and politicians argued that after a certain level of GDP per capita, the internal situation in China would change. The labor cost would increase, the people would be more interested in political changes, etc. The estimation is that this could be a serious threat for the stability of both economic and political system. This argument is probably valid. However, the actual political leadership is also aware that certain reforms are necessary. Following gradual manner, which is probably part of Chinese culture, a couple of months ago, the Third Plenum released key policy document. The document offered a blueprint for country's next phase of the reform, stressing the need to phase out the traditional growth-oriented development model. The country's leadership is also emphasizing the importance of growing GDP through innovation and quality upgrades rather than only through increases in size and scale. The new reform package will likely strengthen China's from inside, and this now seems to be a priority for Chinese leadership. In the future, the world can expect that China will take more responsibilities on the international scene. The position and importance of the economy of any country, taking into account the world comparisons, is always the measure of the political significance and influence of this country. In my opinion, greater responsibilities and influence China will have on the international scene is something that should be welcomed rather than feared of. However, this should be taken as a single fact in the process of creating own strategies. Finally, the position of small countries. I believe that in addition to general attitude to increase GDP, reduce poverty and improve standard of living, all small countries are facing their specific problems. I'm coming from a small country, and this is a good opportunity for me to say something about Serbia. Serbia is EU candidate country, and there are huge expectations of the population related to the future of the country. Serbian economy is very closely connected to EU economy. More than 60% of Serbian foreign trade is trade with European Union. Economic and financial crisis hit Serbia significantly, and the prolonged effects are still in place. There are many specifics of Serbia compared to other small countries. It is well known that the issue of territorial integrity is still pending. Then the wounds of disintegration of former Yugoslavia, war, NATO strikes in Serbia, and Milosevic's regime, all events from the last decade of the 20th century, are still alive. These unfortunate events, however, are more or less also known. Therefore, I am not going to further address or elaborate. Instead, I believe that there is one more issue essential for understanding current public attitude, the issue which is rarely tackled. Namely, the transition from centrally planned to market-oriented economy in all former socialist countries started after clear recognition that centrally planned system has exhausted all capacities to provide for a decent life. In that respect, all the transitional problems are considered as difficulties which are painful, but much less painful than the continuation of the former system. In other words, the recognition of the old system bankruptcy was giving the hope to the population that the new and better days are ahead. Quite opposite happened to Serbia. Serbia embarked on transition after disintegration of former Yugoslavia and after the war. Prior to that, the standard of living in Serbia was much higher than comparable standard of living in all former socialist countries in Europe, including those now being successful and respectable members of European Union. Actual industrial production in Serbia is still below its level from late 80s. In other words, the population has no personal experience of the economic failure of the old system. Many people believe that the current problems are caused by nationalism, which lately provoked civil war and disintegration of the country. They don't recognize that the system was inadequate and that the leading role of the state in economic affairs is inefficient. That is why the transition in Serbia is slow. Fortunately, the new generations are coming, ready to recognize and accept new ideas and new world realities. This is the future of Serbia. And now, what is the way forward? For EU, I'm sure not many good options are on the table. The most powerful one is the vision of integrated European policy. It is clear that implementation of this vision will face huge political difficulties. The member states are supposed to give up significant part of their sovereignty. This will be very painful. There are, however, two foundations for it. One is the apparent economic and social benefits of united Europe. The other is that this is the only way the Europe could make its influence felt on the international system. Individually, the European states are not global players, but collectively they have the ability to become just that. In addition, I believe that in order to ensure long-term position, Europe should work closer with Russia, enhancing political dialogue and joining its technology with Russian resources. The Europe will have to address structural issues by the means of economic adjustment and compromise. One of the aspects especially important to the poorer European countries to preserve coherence of political and economic union in Europe could be to increase the redistributive capacity of European Union. This would provide for more capital investment in Southern Europe and enabling them to be more competitive by building better transport and energy infrastructure. Additional structural funds should be directed solely toward the capital investment and be subject to the strict rules agreed at the EU level. For small countries in the globalized world, it seems that there is no better option than becoming a part of wider integration. If even the biggest European countries are too small to play alone, then it is even more true for small countries. I am happy that this fact is well recognized in my country and that the majority of political parties, both position and opposition, are working hard on Serbia's European integration. Finally, the question of global governments is also requiring new solutions. I strongly believe that the world with more than one global power requires enhanced multilateralism. The best way to achieve that is through a reformed United Nations. The UN is the world's leading institution for mobilizing global cooperation. For example, the fight against extreme poverty under Millennium Development Goals has been the UN's most successful development venture to date. The 2012 Rio Summit decided to launch a new set of sustainable development goals to follow Millennium Development Goals in the period 2015-2030. Apart from global development agenda, several months ago, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution establishing for the first time institutional ties between this organization and G20. Thus, the UN is creating a room to be again in the center of intercontinental and intercultural discussions and negotiations. Of course, the UN needs to reform to be able to play a key role in the 21st century. All key challenges in the 21st century will be of global nature. Therefore, multilateralism and global cooperation will be necessary. The UN should take full responsibility first and foremost for new sustainable development goals in the 21st century in terms of defining them, implementing, and monitoring them. Achieving sustainable development will be the challenge of this century. Throughout most of history, the challenges of integrating economic development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability were local or regional. In the 21st century, however, they are indisputably global. Only through global cooperation can individual nations overcome the interconnected crises of extreme poverty, economic instability, social inequality, and environmental degradation. The United Nations will be more essential than ever. Yet the UN will have to be organized to succeed in this huge challenge in the manner to ensure a much higher level of accountability, timelines, efficiency, and political commitment of member states and UN itself. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the messages that I wanted to share with you. To summarize, I believe that Europe should be more integrated, then the small countries should join by the integration, and that UN should play much more important role on the global scene, not only in the area of security, but also in the area of development. Thank you.